My father called me at 11:40 on a Tuesday night in February 2024, a call that came after nearly 8 months of essentially no direct communication between us, his voice carrying an urgency I hadn't heard from him in years. "Your mother's in the hospital," he said. "It's serious. We need you." I sat in my dark kitchen for a long moment after that call ended, working through a complicated, layered reaction, genuine fear for my mother's well-being, colliding directly against nearly 3 decades of accumulated evidence that "we need you" had never, across my entire life, meant quite the same thing as "we want you," or "we value you" in my family's particular, long-standing arithmetic. A lifetime of clear priorities. My name is Rebecca Torres, and my younger brother, Daniel, was 2 years my junior. Both of us raised in a middle-class household outside Phoenix, Arizona, in a family that had, across essentially my entire childhood and continuing into our adult years, maintained a consistent, rarely acknowledged but unmistakably clear hierarchy of whose needs, achievements, and presence actually mattered most. I want to walk through some specific, illustrative examples from across our childhood and young adulthood, because I think the accumulated pattern, rather than any single dramatic incident, matters most to understanding both the genuine weight of my father's late-night call and my own complicated reaction to it. When Daniel and I were children, our parents' financial resources for extracurricular activities consistently flowed toward Daniel's interests: competitive baseball, which he pursued from age 7 through his eventual, ultimately unsuccessful attempt at a college scholarship, received consistent, substantial family investment across a full decade, while my own interest in theater, which I pursued with genuine passion throughout middle and high school, received considerably more limited support. Framed, more than once, as a nice hobby, rather than something warranting the same level of financial and logistical family commitment. When I graduated high school as valedictorian in 2009, my parents attended the ceremony but left immediately afterward for a previously scheduled commitment related to one of Daniel's baseball tournaments, missing the small family celebration my grandparents had organized in my honor. When Daniel graduated 2 years later, considerably further down in his own class ranking, our entire extended family gathered for an elaborate celebration dinner that stretched well into the evening. This pattern continued into our adult years with remarkable consistency. My own wedding, in 2015, received what I experienced as notably limited enthusiasm and financial contribution from our parents, who cited general financial constraints at the time. Daniel's wedding, 3 years later, received considerably more substantial financial support and visible parental enthusiasm, despite our parents' financial circumstances not having meaningfully changed in the intervening years. The specific pattern of being called upon only in crisis. I want to explain a particular, specific pattern that had developed across my adult years, because it directly connects to the eventual late-night phone call that gives this story its central tension. Daniel had, across his 20s and into his early 30s, developed a pattern of financial instability and periodic personal crisis. A series of unsuccessful business ventures, a difficult divorce in 2020, and ongoing struggles with what our family generally referred to only obliquely as his difficulties, which I understood, through occasional more direct family conversation, to include a genuine, ongoing struggle with alcohol that had never been fully openly addressed within our family's communication patterns. Our parents' attention and resources, across this entire period, remained consistently focused on managing and supporting Daniel through these repeated crises: financial support during his business failures, emotional and logistical support through his divorce, ongoing, largely unacknowledged management of concerns regarding his drinking. My own life, during this same period, had unfolded with considerably more stability: a successful career as a marketing director, a stable marriage, 2 children born in 2017 and 2019, a stability that, I came to understand with increasing clarity across these years, seemed to translate, within my parents' particular family calculus, into an assumption that I required considerably less active attention or support than Daniel's more visibly turbulent life demanded. This meant that my own significant life events, my children's births, various career milestones, ordinary moments of celebration or difficulty across my adult life, received notably less parental engagement than the recurring crises in Daniel's life, which consistently commanded our parents' full, immediate attention whenever they occurred. The 8-month silence. I want to explain the specific circumstances of the 8-month period of limited communication preceding my father's late-night call, because understanding this immediate context matters to understanding my own complicated reaction to his sudden, urgent outreach. The limited communication had begun following a difficult conversation in June 2023, during which I had, for the first time in my adult life, directly and explicitly named the pattern I'd observed across our entire family history. Not in anger exactly, though genuine frustration was certainly present, but in a deliberate, considered attempt to finally address something I'd spent decades quietly absorbing without ever fully confronting directly. I need you to understand, I had told my parents during that conversation, that I've spent my entire life watching Daniel's needs and crises consistently take priority over my own achievements and milestones. I'm not asking you to love him less. I'm asking you to recognize a pattern that's genuinely hurt me across decades, and to make some deliberate effort to actually see and value my own life and family the way you've always so readily seen and prioritized his. My parents' reaction to this conversation had been defensive rather than genuinely reflective, my mother in particular characterizing my observations as unfair and ungrateful, given, in her words, everything we've done for you too, even if it doesn't always look exactly the same as what Daniel needed. This defensive response, rather than any genuine engagement with the pattern I'd named, had led to the subsequent 8 months of considerably reduced contact. Not a formal estrangement, but a noticeable mutual pulling back from the regular, if imbalanced, contact we'd maintained previously. The phone call. I want to return to and expand upon that late-night February phone call, because the specific circumstances and my own immediate reaction carried genuine complexity beyond simple, straightforward concern for my mother. "Your mother's in the hospital," my father said, once I'd answered. "She had a serious fall at home, and there's significant internal bleeding they're trying to manage. The doctors are saying the next 24 hours are critical. We need you here, Rebecca, now." I want to be honest about the specific, layered reaction I experienced in that moment. Genuine, immediate fear for my mother's actual medical well-being, colliding directly against a bitter, unavoidable awareness that this urgent call, breaking 8 months of relative silence, arrived not because my parents had finally, independently decided to repair our strained relationship, but because a genuine crisis had made my presence and support suddenly, urgently necessary. "I'll come," I told my father, without hesitation, because whatever complicated feelings I carried about our broader family pattern, my mother's actual medical emergency demanded an immediate, unambiguous response rather than any kind of continued withholding based on unresolved family tension. Arriving at the hospital. I want to describe the specific circumstances of arriving at the hospital, roughly 90 minutes after my father's call, because the scene I encountered revealed considerable insight into the broader family dynamic, even amid this genuine medical crisis. I arrived to find my father in the waiting room, along with Daniel, who had apparently been present since earlier that evening, having been called first, hours before my own father finally reached out to me. "Why did it take so long for you to call me?" I asked my father directly, once initial updates on my mother's condition had been exchanged. "You said the fall happened around 7 p.m. It's almost midnight now." My father's response, delivered with visible discomfort, revealed something significant about the specific calculus that had shaped even this urgent, genuine crisis. "We called Daniel first," he admitted, "because he lives closer and could get here faster. And then, honestly, we spent some time debating whether to call you at all, given how things have been between us the past several months. Your mother insisted, eventually, that we needed to reach you regardless of the recent tension, but I'll admit there was real hesitation before we made that call." I want to be honest about the specific, complicated pain of hearing this admission. Not simply that I'd been called second, which carried its own logistical explanation given genuine geographic distance, but that there had been actual, deliberate hesitation about whether to include me in this genuine family crisis at all, given our recent strain, rather than any automatic, unquestioned assumption that of course I needed to be there, and informed immediately. The medical crisis itself. I want to detail the actual medical situation my mother faced, because the genuine severity of her condition matters to understanding the fuller emotional complexity of navigating both real crisis and long-standing family pattern simultaneously. My mother, Alina, had suffered a serious fall at home, resulting in significant internal bleeding that required emergency surgery, performed that same night, followed by a critical recovery period during which her medical team indicated genuine uncertainty about her prognosis across the following several days. I want to describe the specific, difficult work of setting aside, as much as I genuinely could, my complicated feelings about the broader family pattern, in order to be fully present for my mother's actual medical crisis. Sitting with her during conscious moments before her surgery, coordinating with medical staff alongside my father and Daniel, and throughout that difficult first night, genuinely. Fully focused on her actual well-being, rather than continuing to process the earlier painful conversation about being called second. The days that followed. I want to describe the specific dynamic that unfolded across the following week, as my mother's condition gradually, cautiously improved, because this period revealed both genuine, positive developments in my family relationships and continued, more complicated patterns I needed to navigate carefully. I took a 2-week leave from my own work to remain present throughout this critical period, coordinating childcare for my own children with my husband, Marcus, in order to be fully available to support my mother's recovery and to help manage the considerable logistical demands of her hospitalization and subsequent care planning. I want to be honest that, across this difficult week, I found myself falling into a familiar, long-standing role, the reliable, competent family member who efficiently managed medical coordination, insurance logistics, and the countless practical demands of a family medical crisis. While Daniel, though present and genuinely concerned for our mother, struggled considerably more with the practical, organizational demands the situation required. A struggle that, I noted with some difficult, complicated recognition, seemed to reflect the same underlying pattern that had shaped so much of our childhood. My own competence and reliability simply assumed and drawn upon, while Daniel's more visible emotional struggle continued receiving the bulk of our parents' active attention and concern. The conversation that finally happened. I want to describe a significant, extended conversation I had with both my parents, once my mother's condition had stabilized sufficiently to allow for this more difficult, necessary discussion, roughly 10 days into her hospitalization. I need to say something, I told my parents, during a quiet moment at the hospital when my mother was resting and Daniel had stepped out. I came here immediately, without hesitation, because Mom needed me, and I love her, regardless of whatever tension has existed between us these past several months. But I need you both to understand something clearly. Showing up for genuine crisis has never actually been the problem in our family. The problem has been that crisis is the only time my presence and support seem to become fully, urgently valued, while the rest of my actual life, my achievements, my family, my own moments of celebration or difficulty, has consistently received considerably less attention and engagement than whatever Daniel happens to be navigating at any given time. My father, notably, offered a response considerably more reflective than his earlier defensive reaction from the previous summer. I think, he said, watching how quickly and completely you dropped everything to be here, while also hearing what you're saying about the broader pattern, is finally making something clear to me that I don't think I fully let myself see before. We've spent years assuming your stability meant you needed less from us, while Daniel's instability meant he needed more. But I don't think we ever really examined whether that assumption was actually fair to you, or whether it was just easier, in some way, to focus our attention wherever the most immediate, visible crisis happened to be. My mother's own perspective. I want to include, once she had recovered sufficiently to engage in this kind of significant conversation, my mother's own reflection on this pattern, because her perspective added important additional context. I think, Alina told me, during a quieter conversation roughly 3 weeks into her recovery, once she'd been discharged home and I remained present to help with her ongoing care. Part of what happened across all these years is that Daniel's struggles genuinely frightened me in ways your stability never did. I worried constantly across his 20s and 30s that if we didn't stay closely, urgently engaged with whatever crisis he was navigating, something genuinely terrible might happen to him. I don't think I ever consciously decided you mattered less, but I think that fear, about Daniel specifically, consumed so much of my actual attention and energy that you were left, unfairly, with whatever was left over, which often wasn't very much, especially during his more difficult years. I appreciated this reflection considerably, while also being honest in my response that understanding the underlying motivation didn't fully erase the accumulated, genuine hurt of decades experiencing this specific pattern. I understand that fear, Mom, I told her. But I need you to understand that the pattern still cost me something real across my entire life, regardless of how understandable the underlying reasons might have been. What changed afterward? I want to detail the specific, gradual shifts that followed this medical crisis and the difficult conversations it prompted, rather than suggesting a single dramatic reckoning fully resolved decades of established family pattern. My parents made a genuine, sustained effort across the following year to more actively engage with my own life and family in ways that more closely matched the attention they'd long directed toward Daniel, regular, proactive check-ins not tied to any crisis, genuine engagement with my children's milestones and activities, and notably, explicit acknowledgement on several subsequent occasions of the pattern I'd named, rather than the earlier defensive dismissal that had characterized their initial reaction. Daniel, for his part, began, during this same period, a more serious engagement with addressing his ongoing struggles with alcohol, entering a formal treatment program roughly 2 months after our mother's hospitalization. A decision that, while not directly connected to my own confrontation with our parents, unfolded within a broader family context that had itself become considerably more honest and direct following our mother's medical crisis. Epilogue. It has been just over a year since my father's urgent late-night phone call, and my family's dynamic, while genuinely still working through decades of established pattern, has moved into a considerably more balanced, honest place than existed before my mother's medical crisis forced a reckoning our family had apparently needed for years, but had never organically found the occasion to have directly. I think often about the specific, complicated experience of that initial phone call, genuine fear, for my mother colliding against the unmistakable, painful awareness that "we need you" had, across essentially my entire life, functioned as a considerably more conditional expression of value than genuine, consistent love and attention would have provided. I think about my father's honest admission that there had been actual hesitation before calling me, a detail that, painful as it was to hear, ultimately proved necessary to finally, fully nomming a pattern our family had spent decades avoiding direct confrontation with. My mother has made a full physical recovery from her injuries, and our family's ongoing relationship, while imperfect and still requiring genuine, sustained effort from everyone involved, reflects considerably more balance and honest engagement than existed before this crisis. I don't think any family fully escapes the established patterns of decades, simply through a single crisis and its immediate aftermath. But I do believe, watching the genuine, sustained changes my parents have made across this past year, that showing up completely for my mother's genuine medical emergency, while also finally, clearly nomming the broader pattern that call represented, ultimately produced something considerably more valuable than either simple compliance or continued withdrawal ever could have achieved on their own. In the end,